The sergeant's hand was merciless, his grip digging deep into her uniform as though he intended to leave his mark upon her forever. With a sudden twist, he slammed her to the ground in front of a dozen silent witnesses. Gravel bit into her palms, the weight of humiliation heavier than the force that had thrown her down. The crowd inhaled sharply, yet no one moved. It was as though the air itself had thickened, heavy with unspoken tension, shame, and disbelief. And yet, seconds later she moved, not with rage, not with desperation, but with a controlled grace that only years of discipline could give. She broke free, rose to her feet, and left the man who had tried to crush her standing in the shadow of his own disgrace. But the story did not begin there. She had carried herself with a quiet resilience. The moment she walked into the drill yard that morning, her boots struck the earth in rhythm, shoulders squared, eyes steady, though beneath the surface lived memories that never left her. She bore no arrogance in her stride, no demand for recognition. If anything, her presence was understated, the kind of figure who could pass through a crowd unnoticed until the moment injustice forced her into the light. Her scars, invisible to many, spoke louder than any words could. Nights without sleep, the weight of comrades lost, the silence of radios that once carried voices she loved. She had served far from home, in dust and fire, where survival was measured not by hours, but by breaths. The desert sun had burned her skin, the smell of smoke and metal etched into memory. She had walked through villages where children clung to hope the way soldiers clung to their rifles. She had written letters she never sent, prayers whispered to stars no one else could see. And in those places, she had buried more than names. She had buried pieces of herself, yet she came back not broken, but whole in a way that frightened those who mistook silence for weakness. Now, standing under the weight of the sergeant's glare, she found herself facing a different battlefield. A different battlefield, not one lined with sandbags or marked by gunfire, but one made of ego, arrogance, and a cruel desire to test her resolve. He barked words sharp as bayonets, taunting, pressing, daring her to react. Each syllable was laced with disdain, as though her service, her sacrifices, her quiet dignity meant nothing against the rank pinned to his chest. The others watched, soldiers in uniform, civilians at the fence, officers with crossed arms. None interfered. The silence was suffocating. Complicity hung over them like smoke, thicker with every moment he towered over her. Authority against dignity, rules against humanity. The cruel game of public humiliation staged in daylight. And in that silence, her heart beat steadily, her face calm, her breath measured. She had been underestimated before. In villages where men doubted she could protect them, until she shielded them with her own body. In bases where whispers followed her back, questioning her strength, until she carried comrades heavier than herself, through gun fire. And now, here again, another test, another doubt. The sergeant's words dug at her, but she did not speak. Silence became her weapon, the unshakable ground beneath her. When he finally struck, his hand on her shoulder, twisting, throwing her down, it was not just an act of violence. It was a statement meant for all watching. To remind them of hierarchy, to strip her of dignity. Gravel scraped her palms, and the sting of it shot up her arms. The taste of dust filled her mouth. For a fleeting moment, she felt the weight of every humiliation endured by those who came before her. Yet as the crowd waited for her to break, she rose, not with fury, not with trembling. She rose with precision, her movement sharp, practiced, undeniable. In one fluid motion, she shifted her weight, broke free of his hold, and stood taller than the man who had tried to throw her down. Sergeant froze, his face twisted not with pain, but with something far worse, humiliation. His authority, once unquestionable, now cracked in front of all who had borne witness, for he had tried to assert dominance, and instead revealed his own weakness. Her silence had become louder than his shouts. Silence had become louder than a shout. Someone in the crowd lowered their gaze, ashamed. Another shifted, uncomfortable with the truth they had just seen. Even those complicit in their silence felt the sting of his failure, the collapse of cruelty exposed by dignity. The sergeant spoke again, words cutting and cold, but they carried no weight now. The crowd no longer looked at him as they once had. Their eyes followed her instead, The soldier who had been thrown down but had risen with strength that no rank could suppress. And in that moment, her presence became larger than the yard, larger than the uniform, larger than the injustice itself. For she did not gloat, she did not strike back. She simply stood, dust on her uniform, gravel pressed into her palms, eyes steady as a mountain. She had endured worse and survived. Bruh. And that truth hung in the air like a banner none could ignore. Later, whispers would ripple through the barracks, through the mess hall, through the ranks. Some would call her dangerous, not for what she did, but for what she revealed. That strength does not always shout. That honor does not always demand attention. That silence carried long enough can humiliate arrogance more deeply than any blow. One line of hers would linger in memory, spoken not with defiance but with quiet certainty. You can throw me down, but you cannot keep me there. Another, recalled later in hushed voices, carried the weight of a creed. A strength is not proven in how you strike, but in how you rise. And long after, when the sergeant's face had faded from memory, when his moment of cruelty was lost to time, her dignity remained. Those who witnessed that day would recall not his authority, but her silence, not his humiliation, but her honor. The story spread further than the base. Civilians who had seen it whispered to others, and soldiers carried it across units. And somewhere in those retellings, she became not just a soldier, but a symbol, a reminder that respect is owed, not begged for. That sacrifice cannot be erased by arrogance, and that true power lies in the quiet strength that refuses to yield. When the sun set that evening, she stood alone by the edge of the yard, watching the last light fade across the horizon. The gravel still marked her palms, and the ache in her muscles reminded her of the moment. But she felt no bitterness, only clarity. For she knew battles were not always fought with weapons. Some were fought with silence, with resilience, with the choice to rise when the world tried to keep you down. And so she walked away, her shadow long across the ground, leaving behind not just the man who had sought to humiliate her, but the lesson his failure had carved into the hearts of all who watched. Somewhere, someone would tell her story. Somewhere, someone would remember that day. And in that memory, her silent victory would live on. Because strength is not in the fall, it is in the rise. Because dignity cannot be taken, it can only be surrendered. And because there will always be those who try to throw another down, but the ones remembered are those who stand back up. So the sergeant remained behind, carrying the bitter taste of his own defeat, while she carried nothing at all. For she had already left the weight of his arrogance where it belonged, in the dust. And those who had once been silent now spoke, not to him, but to each other. Words like respect, honor, sacrifice. Words like resilience, courage, dignity. They spoke of her as though she embodied something greater than herself. And in truth, she did. As her story reached beyond that day, it became a reminder to all who heard it. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful victories are not loud, not violent, not even celebrated in the moment. They are quiet, steady, undeniable. The kind of victories that change not just a moment, but a culture. And for those who listened, it carried a message worth remembering, that every silent hero deserves respect, and that the strength to rise will always humiliate those who seek to keep others down. If you are hearing this story now, carry it forward. Remember her resilience, her silence, her rise. Share where you are listening from. Share what her story means to you, and join in honoring those who fight not with fists or words, but with unshakable dignity. Because true strength does not demand the world bow. It simply stands, unbroken, until the world has no choice but to respect it.